I'm going to let the clock strike 104, and then I think we should dig in. Command decision. And with that, here he is. Excellent. Great. Well, it is terrific to see all of you. Hi, Gordon.
Hey there.
Thanks so much, everybody. Gordon, would you like me to kick it off, or do you want to welcome the group? We have started the recording, so we're
Welcome,
ready to roll.
welcome to the group, and I will be back at my laptop in 10 or 15 minutes. So I'd much rather have you started off, Carol. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, just another appreciation, everybody. Many of you sent me suggestions and really good edits and ideas. And so I tried to knit everything I received by yesterday afternoon, I put together in the document I sent you. And then, Jonathan, I know you sent me some more excellent suggestions this morning. So we may have to just kind of you and I can be looking at both documents and kind of merging these as we go. And then obviously we've got some comments in there that we need to discuss. I've got a short list of things I want to talk with you all about specific to the content, but also to process. So I just want to make sure we allow for a little bit of time to talk process in addition to very specific content. Jen, I see your hand.
Hi. Sorry, I do have some, I'm sorry, it's been a crazy week here in Bangor. So I do have a general comment after talking to our city manager that I wasn't able to provide comments on, but I think might need some substantial, maybe not substantial, but a little bit of conversation.
Great.
But I can bring that up when we're actually in the flow of the document.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Jen. Yeah. I hope that's true for all of you. I mean, this is definitely intended to kind of get out all the things that we haven't had a chance to chat through yet. And obviously, as you get the full piece, the full document in front of you, you're like, oh, now I see where we're headed, and maybe it pings for some new ideas. Keep in mind that our deadline, I'm just going to go to process for a second. Our deadline, our self-imposed deadline, but the one that we committed to for the committee is next Friday. So I do think because it's school vacation week, and I know a couple people, I did get out of office replies from a couple folks. I would love to give people at least, Monday, the folks who can't join today, give them at least Monday. So maybe we can just talk through kind of how we can imagine getting final content put together. We can do that at the end. Let's see what we come up with. If it's all right with all of you, what I'd love to do is screen share the document so that we can actually be looking at it and rolling through it. And then you'll hopefully be watching me at least make comments, if not actual changes into the document as we go. So if that sounds okay, then I'm going to attempt a screen share here. And so the first thing I want to say is that the first draft that I sent you all, I wasn't thinking it through. But of course, this is not a report from GoPIF. GoPIF is the convener. This is a report from the working group. So I'm not sure what possessed me to take the little GoPIF logo and stick it on the document, but that was used for the meeting agendas. But the document itself, or the report itself, is from all of you and not from GoPIF. So I just wanted to clarify why this second version, I just gave us a very generic blue box as our brand. And we can change it to whatever you like. Like Tessa's version had a nice photo in it. We can do anything like that in terms of making this feel like our own. But I just wanted to clarify why that was different. And so what we've got instead is that GoPIF is named at the bottom as the convener. And so with that, I'll actually flag, in case you didn't notice this detail, that the ideas that I got from all of you for changes that that are for additions are in green, and the ideas I got from you that are deletions I put in red. So hopefully that was really clear as we went. So the first thing I want to ask about is really related to page 1, believe it or not, and it's not the convener. It's that we don't have, some of the folks in the working group were not able to attend all of the meetings. And in fact, there's a couple folks on this list that really only came to the first meeting. And I just wondered if you all felt comfortable that we still list everyone, or if you think, and we did, you know, hindsight's 2020, we didn't talk about this on day one, but do you feel comfortable, or do you think there's a different way to do this where we actually flag maybe with an asterisk, or maybe in another way that a couple folks here, Shane and trying to think here, who else?
Keith,
Keith, yes, Keith. There's just a couple people who really weren't able to participate. I just wondered if you all felt like we should be flagging that in some way. And especially because Shane and Keith, you know, coming from the space of lived experience, I think that that was a key piece of our strategy to get, you know, a comprehensive perspectives in here. What are folks thinking on that, if anything?
Yeah, I think if they don't participate, I mean, and just by that minimal first time, I mean, this is, I mean, there was times I couldn't make it, but I watched it all afterwards, right? So, and would chime in. So I don't think I think they should be differentiated somehow. I'm not saying public shaming, but something that changes the makeup.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Scott. Anybody have any other thoughts or suggestions? Tess, I see your hand.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, I think maybe having an asterisk noting the limited participation. I think especially with it being lived experience, I think it should somehow reflect what the representation ended up being in practice. And I know that the intention was to have it balanced, and unfortunately that's not something that we really have, but I appreciate you bringing this up.
Great. Thank you, Tess. Okay. Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Tess. And I will come up with a little asterisk. I don't see this section necessarily as a wordsmithing need. And obviously, when you see the next version, you can decide if it hits the mark. So I'm going to keep rolling. And
Carol, I just had one other thought there. And again, same thing. I don't want to like do public shaming, but if it's helpful, if it would be helpful to put in parentheses like meetings attended, like 9, 4, 1, and just say something that it's number of meetings attended, but I don't know that it's the best.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lisa. Okay. If anyone, as you might sleep on it tonight and realize you've got an idea, or maybe you've seen a report that does something like that. So I think let's just stay open to suggestions here, because I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it necessarily. Okay. Oh, Jen.
Can I just make one quick comment? I think while meetings might be the clear-cut way to delineate it, I think going back to what someone else just said about even if you didn't participate, I mean, you're still listening in and participating in other ways. So I hate to define participation just by the meetings that were like, I don't mean to be like totally nitpicky. I also think from the perspective of the people who didn't attend, it might be just a quick conversation with both of them on how they might want to be noted, because if I was someone who didn't attend and the report came out and my name was on it, I'd be like, whoa, no, I didn't have any input in this. It's like they may want to distance themselves from it. So maybe it's just a conversation with both of them and saying, hey, I know you were appointed, you volunteered, you weren't able to participate for probably really, like, you probably wanted to, but how should we still represent your name here? And they may both say, you know what, we weren't able to, don't even put my name on there. So maybe just a conversation with them.
I love that, Jen. Thank you.
I agree with Jen, Carol. What you or I should reach out to, we'll try to reach both of them and see how they would like to be listed.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. All right, that's great. I'm gonna keep scrolling here. Okay, so the index obviously will get resolved once we have all the content, so that's an obvious one. Acknowledgements. Nobody sent me any comments on this, but I did want to just stop here for a moment because I think this is a key kind of even for the next week, what our next steps look like, which is both obviously the gratitude for the folks that joined us. And I am kind of curious. I thought to myself, what could we send them? Like, is it a little jar of maple syrup or, whatever? So we should think about, like, is there a way to just do a thank you note, if nothing else, for the folks who joined? But I think the second acknowledgement is the most important one here, which is that these are findings and recommendations that reflect the views of the members and not intended to represent organizations or affiliations behind any one of you. And I had understood this to be your intent, but I also know we had talked about you all taking the report and showing it to your members, your stakeholders, your constituents. But I didn't see that as a we're pausing until we get everybody to look at it before we get it submitted. Could we just like double check that we're all thinking about this the same way? Anybody feeling like this statement is not accurate or what you understood? All right, I'm going to keep going then. Thank you so much for cross-checking that. All right. The executive summary will obviously be the compilation of everything that we decide. Here is obviously the legislative resolve. Nobody gave me any particular feedback on that. The working group process would be the next place. The feedback that I got was just a nice addition of participants. You can see that in green here. I did not get any other specific feedback related to our process. I apologize for the for the group agreements. I apologize for the movement, and I hope this isn't too nauseating. So anybody have anything you'd like to amend or improve about the group agreement section? And I think we should assume that the green will get included unless you say, oh, hold on, that wasn't, that doesn't match what I was thinking. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Don't hesitate. I know you already know this, but don't hesitate to go, wait, hold on. All right, areas of inquiry. This is really just right out of our first meeting report. This kind of sets the stage, and I think we all did a good job of getting ourselves kind of organized on day one so that we could then create a report which included findings and recommendations that syncs with those areas of inquiry. We didn't get it exactly the way it turned out, but that's no surprise, but I think it flows pretty nicely. So hopefully you're all feeling good about the format, which is the bigger picture piece. What I tried to do, as you could probably tell, was identify findings and recommendations that, if this was a matrix, you would be able to see the flow. Any questions or comments about our initial areas of inquiry? Okay. So this is a glitchy spot, and I just wanted to flag what I mean by this in case it's not obvious, which is I need to get all of the meeting agendas need to be posted on the back end of the GoPIF site in order for us to provide a link that is enduring. So I was trying to avoid Google Docs, and so I'm working with Jenna at Gordon's shop just to make sure that we can do that, and I think we can. But the other thing I kind of came to realize when I got the little message from Zoom that says, hey, you're almost out of room for your recordings, is that we need to migrate these recordings to a place that's more permanent. So I'm also working with Jenna to see if we can get all of the meeting recordings relocated into a place where they can be there for a while and it doesn't depend on how much space is in my Zoom cloud account. So that's the piece that is undone in this section. Otherwise, what I tried to do was I tried to accurately capture everything we provided to you all either beforehand or during, including the presentations, the special guests, and any links that I provided to their bios or backgrounds. So this should be a comprehensive look at all of the meeting content. Again, following that pattern of agenda, special guests, pre-reading or viewing, and then the recording of the meeting. The only difference there is that the first meeting was not recorded because we were all together. And so we have a meeting report, a written report for that first meeting. At the very end of this section, I included the link to the Library of Resources. That library needs to get updated, and I think we're going to actually identify a couple of documents today that we probably want to add to that as well. But I will get that all updated based on everything we've talked about so that that's available. Do folks feel like this recapturing of what we looked at, who we talked to, when we did it, does this look like it is as complete and correct as you'd like to see it? Or is there anything you would like to do differently about this section?
I think it's good.
Okay, thanks, Scott. All right, awesome. I'm going to keep going. So the introduction, we've got the situation overview. We've got a couple ideas that were tossed out here from some of you that are nice little additions and improvements. At the very end, there was a suggestion that maybe the without harming the public might not be the right way to say it. And then Jonathan, I think you suggested a way to do that. I wonder if you'd mind just sharing with the group what your proposed amendment is to this final phrase in the first paragraph. If you can.
Oh, I'm so gonna give him a hard time.
Yeah. All right.
I'm texting him right now.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Scott. All right, I can tell you, I believe what, let me just see if I can get there now. What Jonathan said was without compromising public safety. So I just wonder if that sounds like a friendly amendment. Any objections to without compromising public safety? Okay, so I'm going to turn that into green. Oh, easier said than done. All right, this is going to be the way to do it. Okay, I will make that tweak. So here's the next piece, which I think is a really important piece of this puzzle, because when Tess sent me some comments, she flagged this right away, which is that the term harm reduction health centers, which we've been using all along because it was in the legislative resolve, may not actually be the best practice terminology for these entities, these, sites. So Tess, I wonder if you'd mind just sharing why you believe that the Overdose Prevention Center and its acronym is the better approach.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So the term harm reduction health center is not a term that's used in any scientific literature. It's not used anywhere other than the specific resolve, because the activists working on it had come up with that term as a way to help frame what the topic is. I think this is just my opinion. I think we should have some consistency with what it's being referred to in the United States. So that's what we saw in the Vermont Department of Health guidelines. The operator in Rhode Island is referring it to as an overdose prevention center. We saw overdose prevention site, I want to say, in a lot of the Canadian language. So I would propose that we would use overdose prevention center consistently throughout the report, just to, be on the same, the literature, the naming, at least within North America.
Thanks, Tess. Do we have discussion on that suggestion? Pros, cons, agreements, concerns?
I have no problem with that, and I like the fact that it's based on what other people are using. I wasn't sure if it was kind of rephrased as the Harm Reduction Health Center for a reason, if that was what the legislature gave us, or if it's just sort of the, as we've seen with many types of phrases, just the changing of the language. So I wasn't sure if anybody had any further information on that.
Any additional intel or understanding rationale for why we would keep harm reduction health centers or why the legislature chose it? Any objection to changing our terminology to overdose prevention centers?
So Carol, Lisa, I don't have any intel on why the legislature called it that, but I just would note that I think it's fine to call it that, and we'll kind of preview some of my comments to come later, which is I think it's going to be tough to argue or to cite the literature that says these actually prevent overdoses in individuals for the long term or on a population basis. But so I'm just saying that calling it that really presses the point of what I think the legislature wanted, which is in the legislation to asking, do these centers prevent overdoses? And I think we're a little challenged on that front, but so more to come.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Lisa. That's really helpful.
I don't think, Carol, that the term the harm reduction health centers, it's not so much that term was established by the legislature. It's simply the term that was used by the person that drafted the legislation. And the legislature did not see fit to change that. So that was a strategic decision that was made by them at that time. But I don't see that there's any difficulty for using the most common term in this country. And I agree with Tess. And I don't think anybody would actually have a serious problem with it, notwithstanding what Lisa just said.
Thank you, Gordon. Jen.
So I just want to think about this for a second, because when I go back to what the legislation says is that it actually specifically defines what a harm reduction health center is in the what we were tasked to do. And it means a facility that provides health screening, disease prevention, and recovery assistance services that allows a person to consume previously obtained controlled substances on the premises. So I just want to make sure that we're capturing, maybe this goes back to even what Lisa said too, is that language was specifically chosen. I can understand the point that that's actually not the terminology that's used in the literature or any other parts of the state of where things are being, policies being passed. But I just want to point out that there is a clear definition in our orders of what a harm reduction health center is, and it does include more than consumption. And it includes offering services that even go beyond overdose prevention in terms of screening, disease prevention, and recovery assistance. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know what the answer is, but I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Tess, thoughts?
Yeah, Jen, I thank you for raising that point. I think in terms of, we've had the opportunity to study this for months together as a group. A legislator who gets this report, if we were referring to it as a harm reduction health center, and then most of the sources that we're citing, other laws, regulations, has the term overdose prevention center, I think that could potentially get confusing. To my knowledge, most overdose prevention centers are offering so much more than just the fact that an individual can consume substances. I think that is usually one element of a broad array of services are offered. One may offer acupuncture, one may offer holistic care, but I think there's a lot of common elements. And I mean, maybe that could be included in a citation just at the front, but I'm nervous that if we use harm reduction health center, that's going to be super confusing with the rest of the information that we're including in the report.
Yeah. Thanks, Tess. Jen?
Yes, and Tess, I agree with everything that you just said. And I think one of the things that's really jumped out to us in the examples that we provide is that a lot of these services are offered at, so I'm just maybe what I'm thinking in terms of a reference here is whatever term we use, we crosswalk it really well. Like when we say overdose response, overdose prevention center, or safe injection site, we crosswalk it to say, this includes entities that would, be referenced in the way that we reference harm reduction health centers. And we're going to continue to use the terminology OPC or safe injection site through the rest of the document. So maybe just a little bit of space that describes why we're using a different terminology, yet it really is the same thing that we're talking about, because there's a full spectrum of services offered at many of these OPCs or safe injection sites.
I love that idea, Jen, that we have like we just add a little, couple of sentences, but it's a short paragraph or section that just flags that we're talking about the same thing. But we're gonna use OPCs for the remainder of the report. And then, like you said, crosswalk or define, show the overlap. Is that what you're suggesting? A section like I've done here where it's like actually a terminology paragraph?
Yeah, and I would even, again, going back to how they defined harm reduction health center in the policy here, is to say that OPCs and safe injection sites do include these full array of services, because I'm nervous that a legislator who doesn't know like all the things that we've learned together, that they are going to say, but wait a minute, no, this was about harm reduction health centers that offered a whole bunch of things, not realizing that the OPCs and the safe injection sites do offer those services as well. So I just wouldn't want to lose that we're talking about apples to apples.
Yeah, that's very good. Okay, great. Is there anybody who has any concerns about doing what Jen is laying out here so that we can make the pivot, build a bridge, whatever you want to call it, to OPC as the primary term, but we have a paragraph that makes it clear how we're making that transition? Okay, I'm going to keep going then. Thank you so much for talking that one through. That's obviously going to be a big find and replace project over the weekend. So we've got about 1,000 references to OPCs and HRHCs. Good. So I think the addition in this paragraph, what is an OPC, HRHC, obviously that will get corrected. There's an addition of just, additional detail about how many are operating in 17 countries. Jonathan, I think you had another data point here you wanted to toss in.
Yeah, I don't, and this is definitely something that doesn't have to be in there, but one of the things that's always stood out to me is like back in 2017, 2018, when in 2017, when we lost 418 people, we really thought like that was, geez, like the high water mark for what we were going to be dealing with. And obviously it just kept going up, especially with the pandemic and with fentanyl, with methamphetamines coming onto the scene. And so now we made great strides with reducing that number, but we're still kind of not even back to what we thought was that high water mark in 2017. So we don't have to include that at all, but I wasn't sure how we could kind of nuance that a little bit to just say, like, even though, and it's acknowledged in the language that even though we've seen this 30% reduction, that we still really aren't back to where we were, or excuse me, back to what we thought was just such a high number back in like 2017.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I did cut and paste from Jonathan's document, so this would get embedded up above, but for comparison, Maine experienced 418 overdose deaths in 2017, which was thought of at the time as the peak of the epidemic.
Again, we don't have to include anything like that, but I just thought it was.
Yeah. Anybody thinking that does not belong? My inclination, you all, is to, we want to add what you want, we want this to feel like your document. It's got your content, and if you've got ways you'd like to tailor it, You know, I think the default position is yes. And then we can discuss if it's got some unintended consequences. All right, I will keep going, but obviously just keep flagging that. So now we've got a summary, which this is almost all of this is from Tessa's original draft. So thank you again, Tess, for all that. This is an amazing overview of where we started. So past legislation, I wonder if anybody has any comments on this. Rick, I see your hand.
Yeah, it's not that substantive, just that DPS has consistently opposed these bills. 1364 in particular, I presented testimony through the governor's office, and we've been consistently opposing these bills. So again, it's not that the tenor of what's the oppositions are with these folks that were listed. It's consistent, but again, I just wanted to make it clear that DPS has been in opposition to these as well.
And Rick, thanks for that. Do you think that that should go under the public testimony? Like, do you think it goes under the opponents, or do you think there's like a, yeah, that's now into the summary of findings. So do you think it's part of the opponent's summary? There's 6 kind of call outs here. Do we kind of flag it?
Yeah, I think I think the highlighted sections of reasons why are pretty consistent with what we've been saying. I don't think I add anything new in my testimony. Happy to provide it, but I would just list with the individuals, Maine chiefs, Maine sheriffs. DPS was also part of the opposition to that these particular bills.
Okay. Rick, would you mind like, can you just send me a couple sentences? Do you have time to do that, where you're just like exactly how you would want that articulated in terms of the theme?
Happy to.
Yeah, that would be great. Any objections to any of the tweaks that were suggested in green and or what Rick just flagged for us? We've got the addition of, well, let me go back up and say, I think that the summary of the legislation kind of speaks for itself, unless you all think that there's something incorrect or inaccurate here. And then it gets into the public testimony, which has just a few little tweaks that I received. These are fairly long lists of who testified, but legislators might be interested in that. And then you've got just a couple little revisions to the proponents, the themes, which was an addition of syringe waste as from the proponents, and from the opponents, there was a tweak to the legal concern. And Tess, I think, flagged this, which is, I wonder how you all want to cope with this, but subsequent to these bills, there was a clarification with the governor's office that OPCs operate in a legal gray area, but it sounds like that may not have been initially the understanding. And so it colored the testimony from the department or the administration. Not being there, I wonder if anybody who actually was there or or represents any of these entities might want to say whether they think this number 5 is an accurate statement. Gordon?
I'm just reading it now on my phone here. They believe federal law currently prohibits the operation of such facilities, creating potential legal challenges to municipalities. Well, I don't have any problem with that first sentence. That was my testimony at that time.
Yeah.
And I don't, I mean, I don't think I have a strong objection to this note that it's been clarified that they operate in a legal gray area. I mean, I think that's a fair statement. I mean, after all, we have 3 in this country that have not been shut down, And
Yep.
we have all of Jeff's things. I did the first draft of the paragraph on the federal situation, so I'm fine with it, Carol.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Jen, I see your hand.
Hi, I know this isn't necessarily in the testimonies, and I know that Dean is not here today, but in going back to my leadership here at the municipality level is, I don't know if in this list you're just capturing those that are in the testimonies or other things that we've heard. Because one of the things that I'll just kind of like plant the seed now is where is the municipality's influence around OPCs, safe being in a community. So what role, impact, say, because ordinances can play a role, you know, there's concerns among some municipalities in terms of what say they'll have in allowing a site in their municipality. So I don't think that's come up in the testimony necessarily, but I know in talking with, I'm balancing like public health practice right now and the concerns of my employer. And
No, I
others.
get it, Jen. And I think this section was definitely intended to capture what happened. So it's kind
Okay.
of a historical look back
Okay.
of the previous legislation. So I think what you're suggesting is really more in the findings of, you know,
Great.
there continues to be, not maybe that's not the right way to say it, but there's concern among municipalities
Yes.
for local control, right?
Because what I've noticed in the document is that we have something around federal policy, we have something around state policy, and then it just jumps to community where there's this like municipality piece that's kind of not quite there.
Yep. And it shows up in the recommendations, but it doesn't, we don't really set it up, right? Because in the recommendations, it says local control. Municipalities should be able to opt out, right?
Yeah, it's just not as clear. Like there's a clear bucket for federal, there's a clear
Right.
bucket for state. There's no clear bucket for municipality.
Yeah. Do you feel like that should, because that would be part of, and I obviously many of you are better at the structure of a statute, but the way we added the recommendation, or at least I plunked it into the bucket under state statutory considerations, which is to give municipalities the ability to opt out. Does the municipality, do you think it works that it stands alone, or do you think it goes under the state law considerations, the policy considerations?
I think there needs to be some reference to municipalities because that is where, and I'd look to our law enforcement colleagues here too, but like that's it. And I heard this in some of the presentations, even that it really took conversations and collaborations with local law enforcement. You know, a municipality can put up ordinances that could help or hinder. You know, I think there needs to be reference to municipalities and their role in this.
And if I could, first of all, I have no idea how to raise a hand. I'm so impressed. I've looked every button on this screen. I don't know how to do it. Anyways, I've been kind of waiting until we get to the summary part to chime in on this, kind of dovetail into what you just said, so I can shut up or I can just do it now, whatever works for.
No, I think that would be great, Scott, because what I'm trying to do, because I'm like oriented to the structure of this more than the content right now, which is, are we looking to add a category to our findings, or are we embedding the municipal component under the statutory considerations? So please
I think proceed. Yeah, I think the consistent piece from, I mean, 3 of the people on the panel are law enforcement, and I think we bring an important part to this for our profession that we want to be on record. And there is a piece in the document, and the document's very well done. I'm I couldn't put this together this well, but it's buried in there, and that I don't mean it to sound like that, but what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to look at this. They're going to go look at it. They're going to go right to summary findings, and they're going to go right to recommendations. And I just think it's just a very important part that law enforcement in Maine is opposed to this, and it should be noted a little bit more, not stronger, but a little bit more obvious. And I think that I would be doing a discredit if I didn't bring that up, because I'm going to get about 100 emails, and then I'm going to say, no, you need to read paragraph, whatever it's in there.
Thank you, Scott. That's really helpful. So I'm just, for discussion purposes, I'm adding a bucket. And I wonder, Jen, if you don't mind me going back to you, because you started the, framing of this, if you were gonna just give me a few bigger categories that you would put into a municipal bucket. It's the ability to, local control. It's the ability to opt out, but it also has to do with, this is me guessing, that it has to do with implementation, because there are some local public health departments, right? There's also law enforcement that is both municipal and regional. What else do you think belongs in the municipal bucket?
I think those are the big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. And it could just be this, the same way that you've almost put number 2 as sort of like local, or municipality, not local, but actually specifically say municipality, because local could just seem like local community without sort of that governmental piece. Municipality. Let me think about it and I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
And another thing to look at, Jen and Carol, is the testimony that the Maine Municipal Association submitted. So they're listed here as one of the opponents, but if you actually look at their testimony, I haven't looked at it in a year, but my recollection was that it was interesting, because after all, we're not, even if Representative Lookner's bill were to pass as drafted, doesn't force a municipality to do this. It gives a municipality an opportunity if they wanted to. And yet here was the municipal association on behalf of all the organizations arguing against that opportunity. And as discussed with me by their lobbyists and representatives, it seemed to come from the idea that there would be a lot of pressure on some of the municipalities to do this, and they didn't really want to do it. Now, again, I don't want to speak for MMA, but Jen, in thinking this through, you might want to go back and actually look at that testimony, because I think that's what I recall from it. And in none of the discussion in the last 5 minutes does that kind of piece of it come up.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to finish this one. And I'm bringing this up right now as an employee of the city of Bangor who talked to my leadership and not a representative of MMA. And so I wouldn't want to speak to what they submitted. And what I'm doing is wearing a few different hats here, my public health hat, my hat as someone from the city of Bangor who has, spoken to city leadership about this and how their message wants to be represented. And, this is definitely something, that Dina would probably want to also chime in on. And I'm just saying that there just needs to be a bucket for municipality in the considerations at that level.
I appreciate that, Jen. And I want to just flag for everybody that in the initial areas of inquiry, we noted we would like to look at municipal examples. So this isn't coming out of nowhere. It just didn't quite find its way back into the thread until it got to the recommendations. But so we can definitely figure out a way to structure this so that the municipalities show up in the findings, and then of course it cascades into the recommendations. Tess, I see your hand.
Yeah, I won't take too long. I just want to echo what Gordon said. Both of the iterations, LD 1159 and LD 1364, have language that guarantee municipalities options of whether or not they would want to open one. And I believe in our recommendations towards the end of this document, the municipal opt-in piece is highlighted as well. So maybe in the summary of findings, there could be a note that legislation that has come forward has always required municipal opt-in, if that could alleviate maybe any concerns or fears that municipalities that maybe wouldn't want one. Because, we've talked about in this group a lot, community buy-in is essential. So an OPC is not going to work in a community that doesn't want one.
Yep. Thanks, Tess. That's another way of saying what I was trying to get at, which is that we've got it in the recommendation, but we don't have the bridge in the findings. So, Jen, if you don't, well, I will double check this with you, and I appreciate that. And also, we know that Dina is on vacation this week, so I can check with her on Monday. But it would be good to just make sure that our municipal representatives, if you will, are comfortable with how this flows. So thank you. Okay, excellent. All right, so we're in the that was a little bridge, an inadvertent but appropriate bridge to the findings. But let me just go back for a second, which is there anybody who has any additional adjustments to the summary of testimony? Okay, I'm going to keep going then. So now we're into findings, which will then flow into recommendations. So what I tried to do here, as I've said, is make the buckets mirror each other. Make an alignment or a flow. This could be a matrix instead of narrative. So we go from our areas of inquiry to our findings to our recommendations. That's certainly the way I've seen most legislative resolves. Reports from Blue Ribbon Commissions and other groups seem to follow that pattern. So that was my intention in trying to do this. So therefore, there were, until just now, 6 buckets. We might have 7. But the idea was federal, then state, maybe we're adding municipal here, or maybe it's embedded in state, but either way, models and innovations, community engagement, outcome data, and then the gaps that remain. So those are kind of the primary categories of our findings, which will then show themselves again under the recommendations. So I want to just pause for like 3 seconds to make sure that I'm barking up the right tree here, but I'm hoping that that is a format that you all feel matches how we've been approaching all of this. Okay, so now we're going to get into one of the bigger issues I think we have to grapple with today, which is going to come in the outcome data in number 6. But before I would, if you can indulge me, I'd like to actually, this is just a summary of findings, because to Scott's point, a lot of people are just going to go there, right? They're not going to read the narrative. So I want to work on the narrative, and then we can adjust our summary accordingly. So if you can indulge me with that for a second. I know on number 6, we're going to have to talk about prevention and the data that either proves or doesn't prove prevention over time. But just starting with number 1 and the findings narrative, it seemed to me that there was general agreement about federal law, and there was a suggestion yesterday that this new paragraph be added at the beginning, which kind of sets this up in a different way. Gordon, because you drafted this section, I wonder if you've had a chance to review the paragraph in green, and if you're comfortable with the idea that that replaces the sentence in red.
No, but I'm reading it right now.
Okay.
Federal ruling that explicitly bans that To date, Supreme Court has not ruled on whether across the United States some operate without authorization, others permitted through local ordinances. Several of the federal issues have been presented. No, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Anybody have any adjustments? And Jonathan, I confess, I didn't get this far in your edit, so I don't know if you made some suggestions in this section, but any improvements to our federal findings narrative?
I did not make any suggestions and I don't have any improvements.
Okay, thank you.
Is Jeff Sherman with us?
I can't see everybody, but I don't see Jeff.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge that, you know, a lot of what I wrote, I drew from his law review article, and I really appreciate the work that he's put into this issue.
Thanks, Gordon. So Tess, I see your hand, and I wanted to flag this paragraph as the next one, but I don't know. Do you have something before the chilling effect paragraph?
I have a few things I've like added to the legal section, but I can wait if you want to go through what's here.
Okay, thanks. All right, so I think there was one suggestion that got flagged yesterday afternoon, was that this term, or this kind of cause and effect, chilling effect on additional consumption sites, might overstate, or we might not be comfortable with this level of this is the reason. It is one of the reasons, undoubtedly, but do we like the way this is worded, or do we want to point out that there may be other factors that result in some sites not opening? So I wonder if anybody's had a chance to contemplate that.
Well, I would guess that there's, again, a number of those factors for that chilling effect, including, what just local, state election, federal elections have probably had some impact on whether people want to move forward.
Yeah. So a look ahead as opposed to the court ruling, adding a or making sure that we're really clear that the current administration may also have an influence over whether
Oh, right, we're
sites
just talking
proceed.
about federal. Sorry, we're just talking about federal.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
forget what I said. I was just thinking
No, that's
about
right. That's good.
in the big picture. Sorry.
Yeah. Gordon, what's your take? I know you drafted this. Do you feel
I'm fine. I'm fine with it as is. I mean, it's true that there's I guess your point, Carol, is that, well, we know, for instance, in Minnesota, we have reports that one reason that they haven't moved ahead despite their legislation is concern about federal law and this federal court decision. So, I mean, so it has had a chilling effect. Now, this isn't the only thing that has caused, 48 states not to enact legislation, but I don't think we need to deal with that. We're dealing with the issue of, okay, the impact of this federal court decision and federal law. And it's one of the things that's had a chilling effect on additional sites being established. That's what I tried to say in that sentence.
Yep. Thank you, Gordon. Tess?
Yeah, just quickly, because I think I read it more as almost cause and effect, that this circuit ruling can explain the lack of OPCs in the US. And just from my perspective, I could, think of 10 reasons why OPCs are not as prevalent. So I think, it's not a deal breaker for me. I read it as this is a cause and effect statement, and I don't think that we can really speculate that every time this conversation has come up in the United States that this was, you know, a chilling effect. Because I mean, what would we say for the case of Vermont and Rhode Island, where they're aware that this decision exists? I think it usually probably comes down to political will, who's in office,
Yeah.
community support, buy-in, advocates wanting it. So I don't know. That's why I had flagged it, but it's not like a deal.
Well, it's not a deal breaker for me either, Tess. I hear what you're saying. It wasn't my intent to suggest that that's why they're, you know, would it help you at all if instead of a chilling effect, we just said it, you know, among other factors, has had an adverse impact upon some states moving forward?
Yeah, I like that. Thanks, Gordon. I think that's a good compromise if others are agreeable to it.
I'm gonna write that down, Carol, before I forget it.
Thank you.
The only thing
Any,
I was gonna mention on that too is that, and I don't know if I read this earlier this morning, but I don't know if we went back, if, Attorney Sherman had kind of had what happened during the first Trump administration about, going after the Philadelphia. Is that in there? Because that kind of gave us a preview of what could be to come. I agree that we don't know and we shouldn't speculate, but
that's not really, well, it says in 2018, I'm up above.
yeah, I'm looking at that. Okay, that's, all right, I'm fine. I just wanted to see if that was in there.
Okay. All right, I'm going to keep going then. Thank you, everybody, for taking a deep dive into federal law or lawsuits. So number 2, setting aside that we need to do more around the municipal component here. When you all look at this number 2, which is state law, policy environment, statutory considerations, this is a pretty robust summary of what other states have done. Any comments or improvements, Tess?
Hey, Carol, just to go back to finding number 1 briefly with federal law.
Sure.
So I had sent a suggestion that we talk about the immunity provisions in the Controlled Substance Act that allow local and state governments to pass laws, and they can appoint duly authorized officers to carry out those laws without violating the Controlled Substance Act. And I think that's important because in our final list of recommendations, we talk about appointing duly authorized officers. So I think that we need to connect the legal argument behind that. You know, obviously, I'm not an attorney. I won't pretend to be. This was brought up in the Drug Policy Alliance, their 3-hour webinar on the legal pathway of OPCs. I think because we have it in our final recommendations, if that stays in there, there should be the legal context. And then during our actual meeting on this, our group did talk with Jeff about the legalization of cannabis and how that violates federal law. So I think having a paragraph on that, I would hope we would put in there because it's something that we did discuss in looking at violating federal law versus not, which states have legalized cannabis in spite of it. That part.
I appreciate that, Tess. I misinterpreted your suggestion as falling under the state section, so thank you for that. So for the folks who are attorneys and others, does it make sense to put this this piece about immunity in the federal component, the federal section, I should say? We do have it in our recommendations, and so I like that we would tie it, that the findings should lead to the recommendations. And we did hear from several speakers talking about this immunity piece, but the question I think is, where does it go? And then who's gonna send me a few sentences to include?
Carol, I mean, I think it's kind of a combination because it's looking at the relationship between the federal government and the federal law and how it applies to states
Yeah.
and state law. I mean, I don't know if you can even separate it, but I think it, again, if we have it in our recommendation, we need to provide the roadmap of how that got there.
I don't know, Jonathan, did you have a thought on this as you're not our attorney, but you're a attorney.
If you want an intelligent legal decision, why don't you ask Gordon? I can just give you a legal decision. No, I didn't really have too much on that because, quite frankly, I'm not too familiar. So it's something where
Okay.
I don't want to just speculate on it, but.
Gordon, any thoughts?
Well, I perhaps need to hear a little bit more from Tess on it. Are you simply making the point that the way that cannabis laws and regulations and immunities have been dealt with in this country, that this could be a precedent also for how overdose prevention centers could be looked at by the federal government? Is that your point?
In terms of the cannabis part, we had talked a little bit. I had asked that question with Josh when we talked about it as a group of, how is it that we have cannabis shops in almost every block in Portland and we're violating federal law? And just, looking at, how does that play out? And then the other part about the immunity provision, similar, but it's more separate. It just deals with when state and local governments pass their own laws related to drugs. If they have a duly appointed officer tasked with carrying out this state or local law, they're immune from prosecution from federal law. And in case law where that's played out, it's been instances of, say, the police confiscate cannabis that was actually prescribed through a legal doctor. The police officer would say, well, I can't actually give them their drugs back because I'm going to violate the Controlled Substance Act. But that immunity provision, because they're operating in a state where cannabis is legal, they're able to then return the cannabis to that person without violating the Controlled Substance Act. So again, I'm not a lawyer. But it's something that was presented to us as a legal pathway forward. There is some case law around it, maybe not specifically to OPCs, but in our recommendations page, we talk about using this mechanism to provide immunity. So I think we should give some explanation as to what it is.
Yeah, thanks, Tess. Gordon, I wonder if you and I could just take this. I don't want to get us into a quagmire because we got a lot to cover, but it shows up in recommendation 2C as provide legal immunity to staff and participants. So I put it under the state bucket of provide, again, not knowing, provide legal immunity to staff and participants sounded like something that the state would authorize. So if we could just figure out a way to weave the story, but reverse engineer the setup to that so that it shows up in the findings.
Let me work on. I mean, I don't think there's a real disagreement here about what the current status of the law is. But it is fairly complicated because it all starts with the federal law. The federal law, I mean, there's areas that there's federal preemption and the states can't do anything. There's areas where there's federal law, but the states can act. There's also prosecutorial discretion. And that's just what we don't. And in some cases, the Justice Department may leave to the local U.S. attorney what federal laws they choose to prosecute. So but we'll see if in a brief paragraph we can't at least make that point, Tess, and we'll share it with you before we stick it into this report, because I don't think we really disagree about it, but it's an awful lot of there's a lot there, and we just need to give a brief summary of it. How's that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gordon.
Can I just
Okay.
add- Can I just add one more thing to that too?
Yeah.
I definitely think that there's ways from the state law perspective to make, to give qualified immunity to people working there, but I just don't know from a federal perspective how that would work. I mean, we gotta remember there are a lot of cannabis shops that still have issues when it comes to where they deposit their money. Because of FDIC rules and the sort of the opinion or the view that some of those proceeds are from or some of that money is from the proceeds of selling something that is still deemed illegal on the federal level. And so those shops need to think before or some banks don't take that money. And I don't know if we could, from a state level, do anything to change that. So I definitely could be wrong on this because I've not researched it, but that's where I think that federal versus state thing can come in and be a little bit confusing and somewhat problematic possibly as well.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. All right. We're rolling. Finding number 2. Lots of content around state law, the background. What did we learn from states? What's the policy environment? What are the statutory considerations? Tess flagged here at the bottom of the first page of this section that we drew a contrast in the narrative between public health and public safety, and that perhaps that might not be the best characterization of this, and that it's public health versus punitive. I wonder, Tess, if you can speak to that and make a recommendation of how you would prefer to see this.
Sure. I mean, from my perspective, I think OPCs in a lot of ways contribute to public safety. You know, they reduce calls for service, they reduce crime, they reduce properly discarded syringes, they reduce the transmission of diseases in communities. I view the dilemma more as a public health approach as a way to deal with public drug use versus a punitive approach.
Gordon, I know you drafted this sentence. Hearing that, do you have suggestions for how you might want to consider adjusting this if you do?
No, I don't want to. I mean, I think I appreciate what Tess is saying, and I understand her position, but that's not what I was talking about as public safety. I was talking more about the neighborhood, the community. So I wouldn't, for instance, be comfortable saying it, a public health issue or a punitive criminal justice issue. However, I might be, I kind of added the sentence as an extra. So I wouldn't mind, it really, it was, I tagged it on there because I thought it was interesting to make that dichotomy, but I wouldn't mind just deleting the last sentence, starting with consideration. It really doesn't add anything except my own philosophy. So I would just delete it, rather than trying to negotiate something that everybody's comfortable.
Yep. Thanks, Gordon.
Is that all right, Tess? Should we just delete that sentence?
Yeah, if you're okay with it, Gordon, I appreciate it.
Yep, we'll take it out.
All right. Thanks to you both. All right, good. So rolling through then, finding number 2, anybody have any adjustments or updates to finding number 2, which is all about the state component?
Let me ask Tess a question. Because, the legislatures are in, I mean, to your knowledge, are these the only 3 states that have legislation as we sit here today?
Yeah, I know Colorado City passed an ordinance, but Colorado has not. So yeah, to my knowledge, those are the only three.
Then I would stand by it. I didn't include the Denver ordinance because, for one thing, I didn't want to pick out one ordinance. There's no doubt somewhere else in this country that's probably where there's a municipal ordinance somewhere. So I thought we were a little safer, given the limited time we have to stick with the states.
Okay, and so I think what we're going to add here is the municipal piece, which is that opt-in or opt-out component, not necessarily examples from other municipalities, but just based on the testimony and the concerns from city, Bangor, Portland, and others, that combination of public health and public safety or law enforcement at the municipal level. So we need a paragraph in here.
So would the
I
point be,
also-
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. No, go
Can I
ahead.
just also add, so there were a couple of other nuggets that came up in some of our presentations about municipalities. I think, I can't remember which one it was, but I think there's one model that we saw where it was actually the municipality that hosted the community engagement opportunities. So I think here, maybe not recommendations that a municipality does that, but to say, in talking with some of the models, there were places where municipalities did engagement with community and did, community discussions. So I think there, definitely at a municipality level, there's the conversations with law enforcement. So I think there were a few nuggets here and there in our sessions where they did talk about municipality involvement. And maybe even, I can't remember, was it Rhode Island? No, Rhode Island doesn't have local health departments. But maybe even speak to the fact that where there are local health departments, that could be an opportunity for, I'm not quite sure quite yet what that means, but
Yeah.
I'm just highlighting that I actually think that we did hear about some examples of municipality involvement in some of the sessions that we heard.
Okay, awesome. So Jen, you and I can just go back and forth a bit on this piece. Okay. I'm going to keep going. Stop me if you can. So now we've got a nice beefy section on models and innovations, what we learned from so many of our presenters. How did folks feel about this section? And do you have any suggestions for ways that we could improve this or correct it? We talk about the medical model. We talk about scope of services. We talk about fixed, mobile, and remote types of settings. We talk about the potential value and opportunity of piloting a mobile site. We talk about the importance of an integrated setup or model and how many benefits that has. We include ventilation here and then other operational and safety considerations. So in the feedback that I received from all of you, only ventilation popped up as a place where there might be some tweaks. But let's open this up. Any comments on any aspect of models and innovations? Okay. Any concerns? I drafted this ventilation section and I don't have any concerns about eliminating. I understand now the difference which was shared from Tess. So the suggestion is to remove the exposure to secondhand smoke reference. All right, I'm going to keep going. We're doing great, but I don't want to get complacent. All right, community engagement and buy-in. Lots of good stuff here. I wonder if you felt like we captured the lessons learned in the list of bullet points. If you thought that the the way that, you know, we talk about community engagement really represented or reflected what we learned from our guests and our reading. Any updates or improvements to community engagement and buy-in? All right, and now we're at outcome data. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate this efficient review. So outcomes data. This is where we've got the scope of peer-reviewed science. A lot of this Tess drafted. So again, just thanks so much to Tess. Gordon kind of overlaid a lot of some content on what Tess's draft was. So this is the part where I think we have to really dig into it. This relates to both the finding and the recommendation. So the scope of peer-reviewed science on OPCs, the Lancet piece that Gordon included a quote from. Gordon sent everybody that document earlier today, and apologies, I thought that actually had been shared before. So I will make sure to knit that into our library and our list of materials. But let's talk about this. And I think, Lisa, I'd love to put you on the spot if you don't mind, because I think this goes right. I think this goes to what you were bringing up at the beginning. So.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Now or later?
Oh, please, now.
Okay. So I sort of, this really, this and the subsequent language in the outcome section jumped out at me because I think, and as I mentioned at the beginning, the original legislation charges the working group, quote unquote, to study methods of preventing opioid overdose deaths by authorizing harm reduction health centers. So to me, that is the primary question that the legislation was asking this working group to answer. I completely agree that there are a lot of other benefits that harm reduction centers or overdose prevention centers appear to have from the evidence. But I think that it's important to recognize that's the primary question they were asking us. And B, I don't think that the literature definitively shows, or as we use in the language a little bit later in this report, what did it say? Overwhelmingly, so it was language that I don't think is really justified. Sorry, let's flip it around here. Significant reductions, considerable evidence. That's what it says, considerable evidence. Because I don't think it does. I think that this report that's cited here and others, I think the strongest evidence for overdose prevention is the study of one of the Canadian sites from several years ago now that said, that showed or projected really from the data, a reduction in overdose deaths for people who live within, I think it was like 500 meters or something of the site, and that others really have not shown that from either a long-term perspective of the individuals or on a population basis. Now you can, and I agree, it's reasonable to project that because of the other harms that are reduced, infection, overall health status, that if you're engaging these people in treatment, it makes sense, and you could do a model that could project that they could live longer. But there is, I don't, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's other evidence that we've seen that says that answers that fundamental question of, does it reduce overdose deaths? So A, I think it's important to leave this in here, and B, I honestly think it's important to, I would say, to put this more up front. And then, that the whole question of, does it reduce overdose deaths? And then later on the next page, page 14, I disagree with the statement that there is considerable evidence that sites are a positive experience for the participants with significant reductions in overdose deaths, health risks, and hospitalizations. I think there's considerable evidence on those other things, but and there is a lot of data that says that people who overdose get revived in those centers. No disagreement with that, but that's different from saying you've overall impacted the likelihood of their overdose death over time, because you don't know that. And the fact that you've got a center and then you revive them is not the same as saying that person wouldn't have had an overdose death without the center. So
thank you, Lisa.
Read on it.
I appreciate that. And I admit I was I struggled a bit with how to draft some of those sections because it really does feel like we're talking about immediate versus over time, and also immediate location versus distance, right? So how do we navigate the data that we have to articulate, positives in the immediate time and the immediate location without making it sound like there's data to indicate over time and over distance? I don't know the answer. I'm just tossing that out, as that was definitely the conundrum in my mind as well.
And I think, and I'm sure there are others who have thoughts about this, but I mean, I think one would be to cite that specific study that showed decrease in overdose death for patients in that, or individuals in that one site who live within 500, just to spell it out. And therefore, a municipality who has a lot of maybe unhoused or folks who would use it, within 500 meters, maybe it's helpful to them. But I think citing that specific outcome is important and is different from saying overall there's considerable or strong evidence that it overall reduces overdose deaths.
Thank you, Lisa. Gordon and then Tess.
I'd like to have Tess go first.
Tess and then
Hi.
Gordon.
Thank you, Gordon. I appreciate it. Okay, a lot to unpack. So I want to start with the second clause of the sentence, starting with however, or that cites lower community overdose rates. We've talked about this a few times as a group, and I remember reading this initially and thinking like, well, that doesn't really sound right. And there was a study that came out after this Lancet report. It's dated in 2024. It's from Toronto, Canada, where they specifically look at the distance moving away from the OPC on reductions in death. I sent Carol the article here. I'd put our chat's disabled, so I can't really put anything in there right now. But they looked at within a 5,000 meter radius, there was a 59% reduction in deaths. So when we're looking at the radius, I converted that to miles. That's approximately 30 square miles, which Portland, Maine is about 70 square miles. So I think something to consider. Just thinking in terms of the first part of it, lowers an individual's risk of a fatal overdose over time. We know that individuals that frequent an OPC are more likely to engage in treatment. And I think you can make the case if you access treatment and recovery, which I feel like is ultimately the goal, to engage people in recovery services, and they continue on that path, that is a part of reducing overdose deaths. And then I had sent Carol 3 studies, one that looked at 1-year outcomes, one that looked at 2-year outcomes, and one that looked at 10-year outcomes, all finding reductions in overdoses. The 10-year one was actually really great because it looked at total mortality, not just overdoses.
And Tess, that's in this comment box that I've got open, where I cut and pasted the information you sent yesterday. Is that the NIH study? At where it says 10-year longitudinal study. Everybody
Yep.
has the ability to click into that because it's in the document. Which one is that?
Yes, the 10-year, that one is in the document. That at one point I had sent you 2 other ones looking at 1-year and 2-year outcomes, but there's so much research on this topic. It's even hard on my end sometimes to have it all together, but I'd be happy to send that over.
I wonder if I'm trying to think of a path ahead. So this is a process question, which is, and Lisa, I'm going to draw you into how to solve this, which is does anyone have capacity to kind of break into let's call it a small group that says, okay, here's the 4 new studies that were not new, but the 4 links that Tess has shared. And given that, what kind of what our statements are related to this. I don't know, Lisa, for example, if you would have any capacity to take a look at the information that
Sure,
Tess.
no, I'm happy to. And I acknowledge, Tess, I have not seen those studies that you're citing, particularly not the 2024 more recent ones. So I apologize if I missed that along the way. So I'm happy to look at those. Absolutely.
Well,
No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Tess.
Yeah, Lisa, sorry, I should have shared that earlier. Like I had remembered seeing it, but I needed to go back and find it. So I was doing that this morning and didn't have time to share it with the whole group. So yeah. Gordon.
So I don't know, I'm a little torn here because I do think that given the scope of our work, that there's literally thousands of articles, hundreds of studies, and we're not writing a treatise here. We're communicating with legislators who have a limited attention span and are dealing with over 2,000 bills. I'm happy to add a section that acknowledges that this issue of community population, level improvement in overdose deaths, that I've been saying from the very first meeting that's what always bothered me was that no question but while a person is using a site, they're not going to die there. But the sites, you don't live there. They're open limited hours, sometimes 5 days, sometimes 7 days. And I wondered what the overall impact was on a person's chance of getting well and or getting into recovery. And so in the course of our work, I found a couple what I felt were compelling answers to that. Elaine, the researcher from Edmonton, said it the best, that we wouldn't find, community level, a population level improvement. And then I found this piece in Lancet, which I apologize that I didn't send it earlier because that document is like hundreds of pages and it's got one little box about syringes. And so I'd already sent you the 180-page report on the Alberta stuff. So I just was trying to give everybody a break. But I don't know. I mean, maybe Dr. Letourneau can find some middle ground here, but I don't think we're going to do better than saying there's this, and then there's this, and that's the best we're going to do. Is we're probably not going to reach a conclusion that says, yep, there is an improvement. We've got a clear track record that actually it not only improves the situation for individuals living in the area who are likely unhoused and use the center, but also that over time there is an improvement in population level mortality with respect to overdoses, or with respect to overdoses total. Oh, the other point I was going to make, and I think it's an important one eventually, is that the no question about the advantage of connecting people who are using with other resources, testing for infectious disease, primary care, social needs. But we can actually do all of that within one of our 14 syringe programs. So you would not necessarily need to give people a safe place to use to receive the same benefit of all those other services we can and do provide in those 14 certified sites. It's actually 19 certified sites, but I think 14 are operating as we speak today.
Thanks, Gordon. Tess, I see your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to not overlook just what happens in the immediate. The thousands of overdoses that have been intervened, how many of those people then maybe found recovery? like maybe it seems like we're, we had 2 individuals found dead in my neighborhood in Portland a month ago. So to me, we shouldn't underestimate what having that ability. And sure, maybe it's not open 24/7, but say it's open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and people are utilizing that site and they're having their lives saved.
Right.
I don't really see the huge difference between comparing like saving lives in the moment or, looking at 5 years if overdose rates go down in the total community. And I think of it more of living in Portland. I know of specific areas where you're going to see a lot of public drug use. So maybe it would make sense that 3 miles out, you're maybe not going to see a huge reduction because the people that are using drugs are not 3 miles out from that central area. So I don't know.
I appreciate that, Tess. Rick, I see your hand. And then let's sort of figure out what the path forward is here. But I think Lisa has offered to review this, and maybe a little work group can, maybe it's Lisa and Tess actually who can come back with a suggestion.
I just think this is incredibly complicated, correlation, causation. I could say from our perspective, we're seeing massive changes in our seizure rates and the quantity and the quality and the lethality of the drugs also have a significant impact on death rates. When you're talking about, our distributors who are bringing in these narcotics have clearly seen the facts that their clients are dying, so they're changing their methodology of how they're packaging, how they're the potency of what they're delivering. So there's so many factors that we could certainly, as Gordon said, these people are going to be reviewing this. If we overwhelm them with materials, it can get overwhelming. But again, I just wanted to add in there that I thought, the statement by, was it Lane, I think, from Canada, this is so difficult to correlate with data that, I think some generic kind of language just basically admits to there's a lot of material here that we have not been able to digest nor give a proper I think, honest assessment of what's out there for materials.
Thanks, Rick. Lisa.
Well, I was just going to say, just to your point, it is the difference between, I think, correlation and causation, or what the studies show. And again, I just think we need to be careful about the studies. We certainly could make a statement like, it is likely that people who, survive and have many contacts with this could go on to, have a lower thing, but it's, you just can't say the studies show if the studies don't show that. So, I'm happy again. I will definitely review the studies that you're referencing. I see that I've got the link now to that first one. And I appreciate the ones for the other 3 that you mentioned. But I just think we have to be very precise with our language. And again, I'm fine with making statements of likely, inference, but I just think we have to be careful.
Yeah,
Lisa,
and I'm happy to do that, Lisa. I can send you all the studies that I found.
I appreciate, Lisa, that you are willing to do this. And if you and Tess can work together and sort of come up with a few sentences that, looking at these last couple of paragraphs, I would say, look at the one that starts in the spring of 2019, the government of Alberta. Doing these last couple of paragraphs in this section would help us a lot. And I think everybody would really appreciate your perspective on how this could and should be worded. Jen?
Hi. So just a quick thought is, I think about this in my public health lens, and for anyone who's done evaluation, I think of like the logic model, like what are our process outcomes? What are our, short and middle outcome measures, and those long-term, maybe based upon what is available in the evidence that's been reviewed, is that there is, again, going back to how harm reduction health center was defined in that beginning, like what are potentially those shorter or middle term outcomes that can also be highlighted. This could be an opportunity to talk about the number of people who are accessing other resources that would not otherwise be available. So I think if we think about that that broader definition of harm reduction health center that was originally put in the policy around screenings and access to resources, that might be also a place where there's a little bit more comfort because the data is maybe more clear. The other thing that I would just offer is I think I remember stumbling upon sort of a systematic review of a number of pieces of literature that were out there, and just the way that they formulated that in terms of like, they didn't talk about association or correlation. You know, they really just said, this looks to show positive movement towards reducing blah, blah, blah. And so I'm wondering if that's the language that we can model off of in those systematic reviews.
That's really helpful, Jen. Thank you. Okay. Good. Sorry for the heavy charge on a Friday afternoon, but Lisa and Tess, thank you for tackling this last section with that other additional guidance. I'm going to keep moving in the hopes that we can cover a bit more ground. I'm purposely not going to dwell on that final paragraph in the hopes that you all can just bundle that in your discussion. So we're now under cost effectiveness. There was one suggestion here that we include the settlement fund. The use of the settlement funds might be best used for either startup costs or pilot projects because of the acknowledgement that they are not a perpetual or we're not going to get the money, you know, forever. As well as this idea that private funding could also be brought into play and perhaps assist with sustainability. Any additions to this piece, the cost effectiveness piece, or improvements? Okay. Participants is a term, outcomes for participants. This is a term that another inconsistency. Some places in here we have clients, some places we have participants. I think Tess has recommended that we say participant. I wonder if folks have alternate preferences that we should discuss this, or if we're okay with participant.
So doesn't the needle exchange refer to people as clients?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Okay.
Some do.
I'm indifferent either way. I was trying to be consistent with what's already being used in the harm reduction community.
Tess, am I correct that you would like to see participants?
Yeah, I think I don't think patient sounds right. I know SSPs, certain service programs, often use the term participant, so that just seems like a good term.
Okay. Unless there's anybody speaks up, I'm going to keep going with participants. We've got these final couple of sections about neighborhoods, outcomes on neighborhoods, impact of improperly disposed syringes. I wonder, especially Scott and Rick, if you feel like the outcomes for neighborhood sections are beefy enough, containing the content you'd like to see in here. Or if there's anything else related to neighborhood impacts that you feel might be missing.
I would defer to the Maine chiefs and sheriffs on this one, but nothing jumps out at me, Carol.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
Chief Stewart was trying to put in the chat that he had to leave because of an emergency.
Oh.
So he is no longer on the Zoom.
Okay. I'm going to just do, we obviously don't have the sheriff with us today. And so I will do an outreach to both of them again, just to make sure that we've got these last few sections that relate to law enforcement and public safety, where they're thinking they should be. So that gets us to findings numbers. Sorry.
I just, on that last part that we just went over, I kind of added a couple suggestions with regards to, I think the parts about the NYPD, buying into this is very valuable. I kind of question whether or not the state's attorney or the attorney general's office in Vermont was as valuable because of just the nature of that being an elected position. But I thought the NYPD portion, it definitely has some value to it. And I believe the other part that I just chimed in on is something that was discussed, I think it was like the second meeting, about concerns over just those sort of nuisance crimes and like petty thefts. And not saying that those happen, but the concern that they may increase. I don't know where I put it in there, but
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I think we've got that a little further up above in terms of things that the community is concerned about. It's in the community section. But we can definitely try to knit that in a bit more. All right. Great. Number 6. This was a list that I brainstormed with myself that was trying to basically capture things that we had said, hey, if we had more time, here's some of the things we might have dug into. So I think the idea here was we just want to acknowledge that, you know, this is not a this is the deepest dive we could do with the time and capacity we had, but obviously there would be much more information that could be gathered or considered. So this was not, you know, again, I'd love to know if you think there are items in here that either don't belong or that maybe there's things that are missing, gaps within the gaps section. But it literally was just a list that I concocted on my own based on our many discussions. All right, I'll keep going. So that gets us through the findings. And then in concept, what I'm hoping happens is that the findings then result in recommendations. And so what I did was I took Tessa's initial list of recommendations and I added the ones that the additional ones that I think we all had talked about. And so this is the short list of recommendations, which again matches that format. So I'm just curious. I won't read them all out loud, obviously, but we've got a federal acknowledgement that, you know, should we proceed, there may be some plot twists and we need to be nimble. State level, we talked about the municipal opt-in. We talk about public hearings, if there's a municipal authorization process requiring that public hearing. I put the immunity piece here, the legal immunity piece that we talked about earlier, as well as the option. I wondered, Tess, actually about D, whether it should say option to fund with opioid settlement as opposed to, you know, this kind of reads like you must do it. But that's just maybe wordsmithing.
Yeah, Carol, I agree with that, making that change so that
Okay.
it's listed as an option and not just the only, like it kind of appears almost, this is what you must do.
Yep. Okay. I see, Courtney, I see your hand up. We're not doing public comment, so I wonder if is there any way to convey what you're looking to say to Tess? I'm going to hope that can happen. Thank you. Tess, feel free to jump in here again if we need to come back to that. So models and innovations. We tried to, I included the allowance for fixed and mobile because we talked about that a lot. I wasn't sure if you all liked the idea of proposing and that or recommending, I should say, that that if we were going to pilot something, it would be an integrated model and that we would pilot a mobile unit. I think we had talked about piloting as a way that it's a way to collect additional data. It's a way to test, for implementation glitches. And it also is a great way to build, an understanding of what's going to happen or what could happen if it was done in a broader scale. I did, after our first draft, I realized I didn't include the virtual model. So that is added here as V. So I'm curious, in terms of models and innovations, we've also got the allowing all forms of substance use, and also DHHS developing additional guidance. Any thoughts so far on 1, 2, or 3 in terms of our recommendations? Tess?
Hey, Carol. Before we get into the actual substance of recommendations, I was wondering if we could just talk about the process for how we'll work this. And I just wanted to make a suggestion or a possible way to do this. I'm a member of the Criminal Records Review Committee, and it's made up of about 20 people with very diverse perspectives representing different groups of state government, organizations, lived experience. And for some things, it may be hard to get consensus on. Others, maybe we all might agree on a given bullet point. And the way that we did it is we, took a vote on every recommendation. And then where there were instances where there was a disagreement, the dissenters had the opportunity to have in the report why or an alternative recommendation. I know we're about 10 minutes till time, and there's plenty of folks in this group that are not here. I know it's school vacation week, also giving them an opportunity to weigh in. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but I feel like it's important that we outline a process that we agree on before we dive into what we want our recommendations to look like. I don't know if others feel that way.
Thanks, Tess. I think I was operating under the original agreement that we would seek consensus as a first effort, and then we would have a fallback plan if we could not find that. So my thinking was to go through this and see where folks, raised the red flag and said, I'm not sure I'm loving this, and then we'd figure out what we needed to do with those. So I'm also contemplating here the fact that I've been wondering, like, what do we do about the fact that so many people aren't here? And so we could actually turn this into a bit of a quick survey if we wanted to go the route of thumbs up, thumbs down, not sure. We could do that by survey so that other people could participate evenly. So that might be a hybrid of what Tess is suggesting. I'm curious what folks think in terms of, I was hoping that we could scan through all of these and just flag the ones that looked like they weren't ready for prime time. And then we'd know what we were dealing with. But I don't know how you all feel about that. Jen?
I was actually going to kind of maybe suggest that approach, because there's already one that I'm sort of like, we need a little time to kind of think of, like, just talk through. So I'm wondering if the first review is which ones stand out as ones that we're going to need to talk through a little bit or nuance, and then the ones that were like, okay, it's fine. Okay, let me see. The ones that really jump out, and all of a sudden, if we're like, all of them are jumping out to us as ones that we need to talk through, then we need to have a bigger conversation and maybe a meeting just on the recommendations.
Right.
But maybe that first question of like, are there any recommendations that are really jumping out as ones that we need to have a little bit more time to work through?
Yeah, that's awesome, Jen. I appreciate that. That matches my hope here. Okay, Tess, are you okay if we just run that scan and then we can decide based on what we learn how we cope with the next phase?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was just throwing that out there as a potential idea if we did end up getting to a place where it's hard to find consensus.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. All right, so I'm going to just keep rolling here. I want to just kind of cover all of them, and then I want to hear which ones are giving you all some heartburn. So we just talked about models and innovations, and how we might approach some pilots. we definitely talked about, again, that allowance for fixed and mobile, and also the allowance for all forms of substance use. And then I don't think there was any lack of expectation that there'd either need to be rulemaking or guidance documents. We actually had a chance to review Vermont's, and so we know there'd be something to build from there. So I did attempt to list what those might contain. The community engagement piece, I think we talked about that right from the beginning as a key component. And so it wouldn't surprise me if you all wanted to include community engagement, a robust investment and dedication to community engagement as part of the recommendations. And then the last two really kind of evolved from yesterday with feedback that I got. So we just wanted to make sure that we covered in number 5 the issue of maximizing coordination among all entities that are state, part of the state infrastructure, that were maybe considering requirements or expectations around public safety. We've heard multiple times, concerns about weapons inside the facility and also the operation of vehicles. So I captured that yesterday. In other words, vehicles upon leaving, when participants leave. And then including anything related to data collection, evaluation, and reporting. That was actually part of our initial areas of inquiry, and we didn't really have much time to get into how do folks, we learned a lot about what people are learning, but we didn't learn how they're learning it, right? So that might be something that needs to get done. And then this number 6 feels a bit like a reiteration of the findings. So I just want to figure out if this is how we want to say it. But basically saying, if we were going to do more, what would we do? So, okay, that's the high level. And I just wonder if folks would mind just round robin, which ones jump out at you as problematic and what's missing, if anything. Jen?
Hi. The one that jumps out to me as, I wouldn't say problematic, but I have to really think about is the one about fund OPCs with opiate settlement funding and private donors. I think that puts a lot of onus on municipalities potentially, because if one of the recommendations is to use opiate settlement funds, like, as you know, in public health, we're in a really tough place right now. And I think that if that was specifically called out without also considering state funding and other funding sources, it leaves a lot on potentially a municipality to have to come up with the money. And I think I think that might not be the way that we want to craft where you should get the money message.
Yeah. Jen, would you feel differently if the word create an option or allow OPCs to be funded with opioid settlement and or private donations, or it's still the same?
I don't think you need to say to allow, because it's up to your municipality on how they want to spend the money.
Yeah.
So I almost feel like it's more like explore funding sources. Some possible options include, but I also notice excluded from this funding option is potentially an RFP from the state. Like, could the state be providing funding for this? So it's like it took all of a sudden, when you land on the opiate settlement funding and private, particularly that, it's like, okay, we're going to leave it for local, because that's who's getting the majority of, I mean, outside of what the state has. I'm just saying that it seems dangerous just to highlight that specifically as a funding source without.
Now I get it. It's you'd like to see it more generic, and then which could include type thing. Okay, that's great. Thanks so much for that.
Municipalities are not getting a lot of money, and so.
Yep. Great. Who else wants to flag items of places where you'd like to either talk more or refine or improve? Tess?
I was wondering if we could include the virtual model as a component of an integrated model, a mobile unit. And I've already said this before, so I don't want to spend a lot of time, but just along the lines of having a virtual line in and of itself, to me, is not really what an overdose prevention center is. So I would prefer that that would be a component of either the mobile or the integrated that is offering all those other benefits to individuals and communities.
Okay, great. I know we only have 2 more minutes, but is there anybody else who has a flag, a red flag on any of these? Gordon?
No, you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I kind of don't agree with what Tess just said, but it's close, and I don't want to take everybody's time. She and I can talk and see if we can come up with some wording that's appropriate.
All right. And these will obviously get fleshed out a little bit if you all decide you want to advance the ball on them. Okay, so given that we have 2 minutes, I like the idea of a survey. Based on what Tess suggested, I like the idea, just given how many people aren't with us as well, that we could survey the entire working group and basically lay out all these recommendations and say, okay, yes, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways type thing, right? That's the consensus. Like, I like it, I can live with it, I can't support it. And then we see where we end up based on that. And we could decide, okay, we're going to write the report articulating how many people were in each camp for each recommendation. I think just the pattern will emerge. Or maybe there's like just a couple people that have concerns and we can do a little tweak. Tess?
So are you, Carol, talking about doing that? You mean by email, you email the thing and people respond to you by email?
Well, I was thinking of like a Survey Monkey, but it could be, or Google, but I mean, something where people were actually just like voting isn't the right word, but.
Sorry to interrupt, but that sounds like a reasonable process, but I have a 3 o'clock, so I gotta run.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Okay.
Yeah. The only thing I'd point out, I would make, Carol, is that, and I could put in a little introduction to the Survey Monkey if that's what we do, but this kind of report comes to the legislature with a lot more weight if it's a unanimous or even near unanimous agreement for the language that's in the report. You start sending the legislature something, say, well, there were 7 here and 6 there. Right. It's not helpful to them. So I'm going to continue to think that we are very close to actually all 15 people being able, with again, not taking any rights away. I mean, there may be a person that has to, have a minority report on a single point. But I think, generally speaking, to have a lot of division in these recommendations is just not helpful to the legislature. And I think we've worked so hard to come so close that I don't want to invite that type of division. I would rather really work for consensus.
Yep. That's a really good point, Gordon. I think in my mind, I was dreaming that, everybody would be like, yep, this all looks good. And we'd get, because if we've really only flagged 2 points, the opioid settlement and the virtual component, that is very promising.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's think about this a different way, but I want to let you all go. I think what needs to happen is that I'm going to knit together all the pieces. Gordon, I'll check in with you. And if anybody else wants to weigh in, I'm going to talk to Jen. I'm going to talk to Lisa and Tess. and we'll see if we can update all these sections by Monday, maybe at midday, and then send it out to everybody and go, okay, which of these recommendations, still gives you concern or pause, and then we'll see what we've got. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. People are nodding. Thank you for staying a few minutes over, everybody. Tess, did you have something that's like critical for this, or I'm happy to stay on if you want to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. For number 6, there's a
Yeah.
lot that I don't agree with, and I didn't want to take up any more time, so I just wanted to know
Yep. Tess, would you, I was wondering, it feels like there might be too much overlap with number 5. So do you have a sense of how, just give me like the big picture of how you would be inclined to structure number 6? Sorry, not number 5, the findings. I apologize.
for recommendations for filling gaps.
Yeah, the findings and the
Um,
recommendations are really similar. And so, thanks, Jonathan. So I wondered if there was a tighter way to do one or the other so that we weren't duplicating. But
So for
maybe you're
number
thinking
for
of something
for
different.
in the actual recommendations for what representatives such as myself will be, I will most likely be dissenting that we would need to move forward and ask for additional study time of certain topics. And I'm assuming that I will probably be in the minority in that.
So you're thinking that number 6 is written as a recommendation that we delay or that we hit pause or that we do more, as opposed to if you decide to do more information gathering, here's what you could cover.
Well, just some of the language of it, like we've only beginning to scrape the surface of a very complex issue. I disagree. I feel like we've gone in depth in many different topics. We've reviewed,
Yeah.
I mean, I've spent dozens and dozens of hours on the work on this, and we've
Yeah.
heard from many experts. OPCs have been around for 40 years. The data is clear. So for me, I like looking for data from Providence or Burlington. I'm going to guess that the data is going to be similar to what we've seen for 40 years. Looking at the public forum, that would be something that would already be in legislation moving forward where they'd be required to do public forum. So I think like for number 6, I would have a hard time signing on to it. I'm not sure if it's necessary to continue work.
Yeah, that's really
And
helpful.
I mean, I don't want to like rehash that out over and over again. I just think that it might end up being a difference of consensus or a difference of opinion.
Yeah, but maybe there's a way that we can word it where it's more, it's less about a hard recommendation than about a, should you take this route, here's what to look at type thing.
Okay, because I agree with Gordon. I want there to be consensus. I think that makes
Yeah.
the report stronger. And I think there's a lot of areas where I'm hoping we can find a lot of agreement. I just think with this one in particular, it's tough. Like we're volunteers. We've used so much staff time for this.
Yep.
And I'm also a big believer in letting some of the debate play out in the legislature, that we don't necessarily need to beat this to death and drag it out until December.
Right. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. Gordon, maybe you and I could also just talk about how to revise or refine number 6.
I doubt it.
Okay.
It's kind of a game. It's an important issue for me, and maybe Tess and I can talk, but I don't see myself presenting a report without that language in it itself.
Okay. All right. All right, that's helpful for me to know.
I know we've covered a lot. So for next steps, am I just focusing on trying to share with some of the information with Dr. Letourneau about more of the longitudinal studies that have been done and
That
the
would
distance from the OPC into the community?
Yep, that would be great.
Okay.
And then I think hopefully she will produce a couple like, hey, what if we said it like this? And then you could just see what you think of her suggestion.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think even if it was like studies are mixed or like there's been different studies showing different things, because I just think like the way that it's worded, it makes it sound like there isn't any data supporting those claims when there is.
Yeah, got it. That's helpful. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for staying a few minutes over, everybody.
Have a great weekend.
Yeah, take care.